Okay, welcome back. This is our Art Impulse lecture for the final, for unit number 10. This will probably be our very last Art Impulse lecture for the course, at least for this semester. I will be producing a couple of videos for unit 11, but those will probably just be the art historical videos and no more than that. So this lecture is on the last art impulse that I'm going to talk about, and that I'm talking about what I'm calling the ideological impulse. And by that, I don't mean the impulse to speak about politics, because after all, we already discussed that in terms of art and power. What I'm talking about here is the impulse to make art that is about art, that is about the idea of art making and is part of a dialogue about what is or is not art, and about just the relationship between you know how one work of art affects and relates to another work of art. And so I'm using, to a certain degree, I'm using this piece, or actually really two pieces, because what we're looking at is a Matthew Barney piece right here, a very early one. I think he actually might have been in school when he did this piece, and a piece by Bruce Nauman that was about maybe 15 years before then. No, maybe more like 20 years before then. And about the relationship between those two pieces. So we're going to get back to that at the very end of the lecture. But right now, just think of this lecture as basically about, in some ways, explaining this, explaining that relationship. But we're going to have to go kind of back to the beginning. So a lot of the art impulses that we have talked about, especially at the beginning, were very much about universal things, kind of like the universal reasons why people make art, and the kind of universal things that people hope to get out or hope to use art for. And so definitely like the existential impulse and the art and religion impulse, right? Those were very much related to these are almost universal things that we look at art all over the world that relate to these things. But there's other impulses, like more and more as we've been talking about the impulses of the final 3 or 4 units. They're more and more becoming impulses that we see more in the last couple of centuries, and specifically the Western, or inspired by Western culture, of the last 2 or 3 centuries. And this impulse is even more so kind of like a more recent thing, which is this idea that art is in some ways an act that's about art, and that when someone makes a painting, they are in somewhat part of this dialogue where they're talking about what is good painting, what is bad painting. And I think we can see the beginnings of this trend in something we talked about already, which was the whole Caravaggio versus Carracci divide, this kind of debate in the Baroque as to what was, what was the right direction for painting to go in? What should the painting of that period post the Renaissance, what should it be like? How much should it be conservative and really just kind of following the the developments of the Renaissance, and how much should it be going in a new direction? And I guess, but one of the main differences compared to like today is that this was a dialogue mostly made by other people about these two artists. It was not so much a dialogue that Caravaggio made about himself, saying, I am so much greater than Carracci, and what I'm trying to do is so much more important than what Carracci is doing. It was more other people made it an issue. And I think to a certain degree, the same is true about this big divide, the Delacroix versus Ingres divide in the Romantic period in France, where we see this kind of strong debate as to what is the right direction that art should be going in. What is the right what is truly romantic? Should romantic art be loose and gestural? Should it be made by someone who's like Delacroix, or can great art be made by someone more like Ang? And so once again, though, most of the debate was not made by the artists themselves, although reporters would interview them and say, "What do you think of this?" or whatever. But the debate was really written by other people, art critics and commentators on culture, as to what they thought was the important thing about how art should develop and what is good art. And another trend that we start to see in the 19th century is, and I think it becomes even more important, is this trend of artists starting to group themselves into groups, into communities, communities that then pull away from the rest of society. And to a certain degree, this was at first just a reflection of a lot of romantic ideals, but I think it is also in some ways part of this growing trend among artists of like one way that you can have an influence in terms of saying this is what we think art should be moving towards is by making it a community, right? Your voice is stronger if you can say it as a whole group. And so the Nazarenes, which was a group of German Romanticist painters who were living in Italy, and they were trying in a way to kind of bring artwork backwards, take it back to a simpler, more innocent time. And I think to a certain degree, they felt like they could do that more effectively by being grouped together, by being, um, and in a similar way, although the Pre-Raphaelites were much more loosely formed, some tried to kind of group together, to maybe to live together in certain locations, but they were much more amorphous as a whole group. But still, there was this sense of if we can all commonly agree of what we're aiming to do, what we're trying to do with our art, then we can make more of a message. I think also especially in the late 19th century, we see much more of a development towards art that is made by artists who are really purposely trying to connect with the public and even agitate, upset the public, and create a dialogue with the critics. And I mean, Whistler is a perfect example of this, especially with his nocturnes, where he was trying to make paintings that were really pushing the boundaries of like, for his time, how much can a painting just be an organization of shapes and just be a suggestion rather than be a fully formed thing, instead of drawing out the bridge, just kind of create the shapes that are looming there and suggest what he's seeing. And then the fact that then people got upset about that and there was, lawsuits and everything is all part of that point of trying to make a dialogue. So I think also, as we get to the end of the 19th century, we're looking at artists who are much more trying to think about what art am I doing and what does it say about what art people, what direction art should be going in. I think Seurat definitely felt like what he was doing was on the cutting edge, trying to figure out, using the latest theories of, in terms of color and light and how, color was made up of small units, that he could create kind of a divisionist sort of approach to color. So here we have these paintings. I love these paintings. And let me just say, we're kind of repeating a lot of this as we're doing this review. I'm looking at a lot of work that we've already seen. And I do that on purpose because I really want you, instead of like always showing you new things and confusing you, I want you to get kind of used to some of the stuff I'm showing you. And I think Cezanne also had this sense that he was making art as much as a statement. He famously said that he wanted to take kind of the colors and the achievements of the Impressionists, but turn it into painting that was, that had the solidity and the weight and the permanence of museum painting. So like basically like Poussin, right? Painting that had that sense of solidness, of going to last forever kind of quality. That's my 1 minute warning. So that brings us all the way up to the 20th century. And this is probably a good place for us to stop and start the next lecture. So here we're going to talk about the 20th century and how this idea of artists making art for a purpose, and that purpose being about what they want to say about art, really kind of just explodes. All right, see you in a